Man abandons cat in the woods. Then something unbelievable happens. How will this story unfold? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. The dense forest was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the cool breeze. The sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. A man stood at the edge of the woods, clutching a small bundle in his arms. His expression was tense, his jaw clenched as he took a deep breath. Daniel's heart was heavy with guilt as he looked down at the cat in his arms. Misty, his gray tabby, blinked up at him with trusting, wide eyes. She had been his companion for 2 years, a source of comfort during lonely nights and stressful days. But life had taken a harsh turn recently, and Daniel felt as though he had no choice. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know what else to do." Misty tilted her head, letting out a soft, questioning meow. She had no way of understanding the turmoil in Daniel's mind. She only knew that she loved him and trusted him completely. It had been a difficult few months for Daniel. He had lost his job, fallen behind on rent, and struggled to make ends meet. The financial burden weighed heavily on him, and the thought of being evicted haunted his every waking moment. He had tried to find a solution, but nothing seemed to work. The idea of abandoning Misty had crept into his mind during one of his lowest points. "She'll be fine," he told himself, trying to silence the voice in his head that screamed otherwise. "She's a smart cat. She'll survive out here." But as he knelt to place Misty on the forest floor, the sight of her small, confused face nearly broke him. She let out another soft meow, stepping closer to him as if to say, "Where are we going? Why are you leaving me here?" Daniel couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. "I'm doing this for you," he said, though the words felt hollow. "You deserve better than what I can give you." He stood abruptly, turning away before he could change his mind. His footsteps were heavy on the dirt path as he walked back toward his car, each step feeling like a betrayal. Misty followed him for a few moments, her small paws crunching on the fallen leaves, but she eventually stopped, sitting down and watching him go. By the time Daniel reached his car, his hands were trembling. He sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel tightly as he tried to steady his breathing. Images of Misty's face flashed in his mind, her wide, innocent eyes filled with confusion. He slammed his fists against the dashboard, anger and regret surging through him. "What have I done?" he muttered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of his heart. But he couldn't bring himself to go back. He started the car and drove away, the weight of his decision pressing down on him like a lead blanket. Back in the forest, Misty remained where Daniel had left her. The sun had dipped lower, and the shadows around her grew longer. She let out a few plaintive meows, hoping he would return, but the only response was the distant sound of birds calling to each other. Misty took a hesitant step forward, her ears swiveling as she listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the woods. She had never been outside for long periods before, let alone in a place as vast and intimidating as this. Her instincts, dulled by a life of domesticity, struggled to kick in, but Misty was not without resilience. After a few minutes of sitting and waiting for Daniel, she began to explore her surroundings. Her nose twitched as she sniffed the air, picking up the scent of damp earth and foliage. She padded forward cautiously, her movements quiet and deliberate. As night fell, Misty found shelter beneath a fallen log, curling up tightly to conserve warmth. The forest was alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, and every rustle of leaves or crack of twigs made her ears perk up. She felt small and vulnerable, but she refused to give in to fear. The next morning, Misty ventured out in search of food. Her stomach growled, a reminder of the kibble she had always taken for granted. She followed her nose, picking up the faint scent of something edible. It led her to a patch of wild berries, and though they were far from the meals she was used to, she nibbled on them gratefully. Misty's first few days in the forest were a trial by fire. She faced cold nights, scarce food, and the constant threat of predators. But with each passing day, her instincts grew sharper. She learned to climb trees to escape danger, to stalk small creatures for sustenance, and to find hidden sources of water. Meanwhile, Daniel was falling apart. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and couldn't stop thinking about Misty. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the way she had looked at him with such trust and love. The guilt gnawed at him, growing stronger with each passing day. He tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing, that Misty would adapt to her new environment and thrive. But deep down, he knew he had made a terrible mistake. "I have to go back," he finally admitted to himself one night, his voice trembling. "I have to find her." Daniel didn't waste any more time. The next morning, he packed a small bag with essentials: water, snacks, a flashlight, and a blanket. He also grabbed Misty's favorite toy, a small stuffed mouse she loved to bat around the house. His hands trembled as he held it, the weight of his guilt making his chest feel tight. As he drove back to the forest, his mind raced with questions. What if she's already gone? What if something happened to her? What if she's too scared to come to me? He shook his head, trying to push the doubts aside. He had to try. He owed her that much. The forest was just as quiet as he remembered when he pulled up to the edge. The late morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Daniel stood for a moment, listening to the sounds of rustling leaves and distant bird calls. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped into the woods. Misty had been adapting to her new life in the forest, but it hadn't been easy. She missed the comforts of home, the warmth of her bed, the steady supply of food, and most of all, the companionship of Daniel. Her days were spent wandering through the trees, searching for food and water, and her nights were filled with the constant vigilance required to avoid predators. She had encountered a few dangers in the past week: a fox that had chased her up a tree, a hawk that had circled overhead, and a sudden thunderstorm that had left her drenched and shivering. But despite it all, Misty's resilience was remarkable. Her instincts had sharpened, and she had learned to navigate her surroundings with confidence. That morning, Misty had found a quiet spot near a small stream. She had spent some time drinking from the cool, clear water before curling up in a patch of sunlight to nap. The gentle warmth of the sun on her fur was comforting, and for a brief moment, she felt at peace. Daniel wandered through the forest, calling Misty's name softly. He knew she might not come running to him right away, if she was even still here. He stopped frequently to listen, hoping to hear the familiar sound of her meow. But the woods were vast, and the task of finding one small cat felt overwhelming. He came across the spot where he had left her a week ago. The area was undisturbed, but there was no sign of Misty. Daniel crouched down, running his fingers over the ground. "Misty," he called gently, his voice filled with desperation. "I'm so sorry. Please come back." As the hours passed, Daniel's hope began to waver. He searched every clearing, every fallen log, and every cluster of bushes, but Misty was nowhere to be found. The forest seemed to grow quieter with each passing moment, as though it were mocking his efforts. But then, as Daniel paused to catch his breath, he heard a faint rustling sound nearby. His heart leapt, and he turned toward the source of the noise. "Misty," he called, his voice trembling. "Is that you?" Misty had been dozing near the stream, but she heard the sound of a familiar voice. Her ears perked up, and she lifted her head, her golden eyes scanning the area. The voice called again, and this time she recognized it. It was Daniel. Her heart raced with a mix of emotions: relief, excitement, and hesitation. She stood and took a few cautious steps toward the sound, her tail flicking nervously. Part of her wanted to run to him, but another part remembered the moment he had left her here, alone and scared. The voice called again, closer this time. Misty hesitated for only a moment longer before deciding to follow it. She moved quietly through the underbrush, her small paws barely making a sound on the forest floor. When she finally spotted him, standing in a clearing with her toy in his hand, her heart swelled. Daniel froze as Misty stepped into the clearing. Her fur was slightly matted, and she looked thinner than he remembered, but she was alive. Tears filled his eyes as he dropped to his knees, holding out the stuffed mouse. "Misty," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Misty stared at him for a long moment, her ears twitching. Then, slowly, she took a step forward. And another. Until finally, she was close enough to sniff the toy in his hand. Her eyes met his, and in that instant, the bond between them was rekindled. Daniel reached out tentatively, his hand trembling as he stroked her fur. "You're okay," he said, his voice filled with relief. "You're okay." Misty let out a soft meow, leaning into his touch. The flood of emotions was overwhelming for both of them: relief, forgiveness, and the unmistakable warmth of love. Daniel scooped Misty into his arms, holding her close as tears streamed down his face. "I'll never leave you again," he promised, his voice shaking. "I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe." Misty nuzzled against his chest, her soft purrs a sign of her forgiveness. For the first time in days, Daniel felt a sense of peace. He had made a terrible mistake, but he had been given a second chance to make things right. As they made their way back through the forest, Daniel spoke to Misty softly, telling her about everything that had happened since he had left her. "I've been a mess without you," he admitted. "But I'm going to fix this. I'll figure everything out, and we'll get through it together." Misty listened, her golden eyes filled with trust. She didn't understand his words, but she could feel the sincerity in his voice and the love in his touch. When they finally reached Daniel's car, he placed Misty gently in the passenger seat, wrapping her in the blanket he had brought. She curled up, her small body relaxing for the first time in days. Daniel sat behind a wheel, glancing over at her with a mix of relief and determination. "We're going home," he said, starting the engine. "And this time, I'm going to do things right." The drive back was quiet, the forest fading into the distance as Daniel focused on the road ahead. Misty dozed peacefully beside him, her presence a comforting reminder of the bond they shared. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt a glimmer of hope. Daniel drove in silence, his mind racing with thoughts of how he would make things right. He glanced at Misty, who was curled up in the passenger seat, her small body rising and falling with each breath. The sight of her safe and resting brought him a sense of relief he hadn't felt in weeks. As the car rolled into the driveway of his modest home, Daniel shut off the engine and turned to Misty. "We're back," he said softly, reaching out to stroke her fur. Misty stretched and let out a soft meow, blinking at him with her golden eyes. Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "Let's get you inside." He carefully carried Misty into the house, sitting her down on the living room couch. The space felt different now, empty and quiet, but having Misty there brought a sense of life back into it. Daniel fetched a bowl of water and set it in front of her, watching as she drank eagerly. "You must be starving," he said, heading to the kitchen. He opened the pantry and pulled out the bag of cat food he had left untouched since she'd been gone. As he poured the kibble into a bowl, the sound made Misty's ears perk up. She trotted over, her tail held high, and began eating with enthusiasm. Daniel sat on the floor, watching her. "I'm so sorry, Misty," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know how I could have done that to you. You didn't deserve it." Misty paused her eating to look up at him, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. She let out a soft purr, stepping closer to nuzzle his hand. The gesture brought tears to Daniel's eyes. "Thank you for forgiving me," he whispered. "I promise I'll do better." The days that followed were a time of healing for both Daniel and Misty. Daniel worked tirelessly to rebuild the life he had let slip away, taking odd jobs to make ends meet and finding ways to manage his financial struggles. Misty became his constant companion, a source of comfort and motivation. Every morning, Daniel would wake to find Misty curled up at the foot of his bed, her soft purring a reminder of the bond they shared. He made a point to spend time with her each day, whether it was playing with her favorite toy or simply sitting together on the couch. Their connection grew stronger with each passing moment, and Daniel found himself wondering how he had ever thought he could live without her. One afternoon, as Daniel sat at his desk updating his resume, he glanced over at Misty, who was perched on the windowsill watching the world outside. The sunlight caught her fur, highlighting the soft gray stripes that ran along her back. She looked peaceful, content, a stark contrast to the frightened and vulnerable cat he had left in the woods. Daniel felt a pang of guilt as he thought back to that day. It was a memory that still haunted him, but also served as a reminder of how far they had come. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined not to waste it. "Misty," he said, his voice soft, "I don't know what I'd do without you." Misty turned to look at him, her tail swishing lazily. She let out a soft chirp as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere." As the weeks turned into months, Daniel's situation began to improve. He found a steady job at a local hardware store, and while it wasn't glamorous, it provided enough to cover his expenses and keep a roof over their heads. He started to feel a sense of stability returning to his life, and with it came a newfound appreciation for the little things, like the way Misty would greet him at the door each evening, or the way she'd curl up in his lap while he watched TV. One evening, as Daniel sat on the couch with Misty purring contentedly beside him, he reflected on how much his life had changed. He realized that Misty had been the catalyst for that change. Her resilience, her forgiveness, and her unwavering trust had inspired him to be better, to face his challenges head-on, and to never take their bond for granted. "You saved me as much as I saved you," Daniel said, scratching behind her ears. Misty let out a pleased meow, leaning into his touch. I don't think I'll ever be able to repay you for that. But Misty's impact on Daniel's life didn't stop there. Her story began to spread among Daniel's friends and coworkers, many of whom were moved by the tale of her abandonment and subsequent reunion with her owner. People were inspired by her resilience and Daniel's determination to make amends. One day, a coworker approached Daniel at the store. Hey, I heard about what you went through with your cat, she said. It's an incredible story. Have you ever thought about sharing it more widely? Daniel hesitated. The idea of sharing such a personal experience felt daunting, but he also saw the potential to inspire others. I don't know, he admitted. I wouldn't even know where to start. Well, if you ever decide to, let me know, his coworker said with a smile. I think a lot of people could learn something from what you went through. That evening, Daniel sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He began to write, pouring his heart into the story of Misty, how he had abandoned her, the guilt that had consumed him, and the incredible journey that had brought them back together. The words came easily, each one a reflection of the love and gratitude he felt for his feline companion. When he finished, he shared the story online, unsure of what to expect. To his surprise, the response was overwhelming. People from all over the world reached out to share their own stories of second chances, of the pets that had changed their lives, and of the lessons they had learned about compassion and forgiveness. Daniel was moved by the outpouring of support and connection. He realized that Misty's story was no longer just his own. It belonged to everyone who had ever experienced the transformative power of love and redemption. One day, Daniel received an invitation from a local animal shelter to speak at an event promoting pet adoption and responsible ownership. They had read his story and wanted him to share it with others. Daniel was nervous, but he knew this was an opportunity to make a difference. Standing before a crowd of animal lovers, Daniel held Misty in his arms as he recounted their journey. I made a terrible mistake, he said, his voice steady but emotional. But Misty taught me that it's never too late to make things right. She showed me what it means to be resilient, to forgive, and to love unconditionally. The audience was captivated, and when Daniel finished, the room erupted into applause. Misty let out a soft meow, as if acknowledging the attention, and Daniel couldn't help but laugh. She's the real hero, he said, holding her up for everyone to see. The event was a turning point for Daniel. He began volunteering at the shelter, using his experience to help others who were struggling to care for their pets. He spoke at schools, community centers, and even online forums, sharing Misty's story and advocating for the importance of compassion and responsibility. Misty became a beloved figure in their community, often accompanying Daniel to events and charming everyone she met. Her story inspired countless people to adopt animals, to give second chances, and to recognize the incredible bonds that could form between humans and their pets. Months turned into years, and Daniel and Misty's bond grew even stronger. The story of their journey, from abandonment to redemption, continued to resonate far beyond their small community. Daniel had become a symbol of hope and resilience, and Misty was now seen as an ambassador for second chances. Together, they were an inseparable team. Daniel's life had transformed in ways he could never have imagined. His volunteering at the animal shelter turned into a full-time role, where he helped rescue and rehabilitate animals in need. It was work that gave him a deep sense of purpose, and Misty was always by his side, offering comfort to the animals they cared for. She had a calming presence, and many of the frightened or traumatized animals seemed to draw strength from her. You're like a little healer, Daniel often told Misty, scratching behind her ears as she purred contentedly. You have no idea how much good you've done. One day, Daniel was approached by a local journalist who wanted to write a feature about him and Misty for the community newspaper. At first, Daniel was hesitant. He didn't consider himself anyone special, and the idea of being in the spotlight made him uneasy. But the journalist convinced him that their story could inspire others. The article, titled A Tale of Redemption, How One Man and His Cat Changed Each Other's Lives, was an instant hit. It detailed Daniel's struggles, his mistakes, and the incredible bond he and Misty had formed after their reunion. The story struck a chord with readers, many of whom reached out to share their own experiences or simply to thank Daniel for his honesty. One letter, in particular, stood out to Daniel. It was from a single mother who had recently lost her job and was struggling to care for her 2 children and their dog. Your story reminded me that it's okay to ask for help, she wrote. I took my dog to a local shelter for temporary care until I can get back on my feet, and they were so understanding. Thank you for showing me that there's always a way to make things right. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he read the letter. He couldn't have imagined that his story would have such a profound impact on others. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small box where he kept mementos of his journey with Misty. As their story gained more attention, Daniel and Misty were invited to speak at larger events, including a regional conference on animal welfare. Daniel was nervous about addressing such a large audience, but Misty's presence gave him the confidence he needed. Standing on stage with Misty perched on a small table beside him, Daniel shared their story with the crowd. He spoke about the mistakes he had made, the lessons he had learned, and the incredible bond that had changed his life. I thought I was saving Misty when I brought her back from the forest, he said, his voice steady but emotional. But the truth is, she saved me. She reminded me of the importance of compassion, forgiveness, and never giving up. The audience erupted into applause, and Misty let out a soft meow, as if acknowledging their appreciation. Daniel smiled, reaching over to stroke her fur. She's the real star, he said, earning a round of laughter. The conference marked a turning point for Daniel. He realized that his story wasn't just about him and Misty. It was about the countless animals and humans who needed second chances. He decided to dedicate his life to advocating for animals, using his voice to raise awareness about adoption, rehabilitation, and the importance of treating all creatures with kindness. With the support of the animal shelter, Daniel launched a campaign called Second Chances, aimed at providing resources and support for pet owners facing difficult circumstances. The campaign included educational workshops, financial assistance programs, and partnerships with local businesses to create pet-friendly initiatives. Misty became the face of the campaign, her image appearing on posters, flyers, and social media posts. Her story inspired countless people to take action, whether it was adopting a shelter animal, volunteering at a rescue center, or simply spreading the message of compassion. One particularly memorable moment came during a visit to a school where Daniel and Misty were invited to speak to a group of elementary students. The children were fascinated by Misty, who sat calmly on Daniel's lap as he told their story. "Why did you leave her in the forest?" one boy asked, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. Daniel took a deep breath, his heart aching at the memory. "I made a mistake," he said honestly. "I was scared and didn't know how to handle my problems. But Misty forgave me, and she showed me that it's never too late to do the right thing." The boy nodded thoughtfully, then raised his hand again. "How did you know she'd forgive you?" Daniel smiled, glancing down at Misty. "I didn't," he admitted, "but I hoped she would. And when I saw her again, I realized that love and trust can overcome even the biggest mistakes." The children clapped, and several of them lined up afterward to pet Misty, who accepted their attention with her usual grace. Daniel left the school that day feeling hopeful for the future, knowing that Misty's story had planted seeds of kindness in the hearts of the next generation. As the years went by, Daniel and Misty's lives became a testament to the power of redemption and resilience. The Second Chances campaign grew into a national movement, with chapters in cities across the country. Daniel's work earned him recognition from animal welfare organizations, but he remained humble, always crediting Misty as the true inspiration behind it all. One evening, as Daniel sat on the porch of their home, Misty curled up beside him. He reflected on how far they had come. The stars sparkled above them, and the cool night air carried the soft sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. "I never could have imagined this life," Daniel said, scratching Misty's chin. "You've given me so much more than I ever deserved." Misty purred softly, her golden eyes meeting his. In that moment, Daniel felt a profound sense of gratitude for Misty, for their journey, and for the second chance he had been given to make things right. The years continued to pass, and the story of Daniel and Misty became a symbol of hope for people around the world. Their message of compassion, second chances, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals inspired countless individuals to take action in their own lives. Daniel often reflected on how Misty had changed him, and every time he looked into her golden eyes, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Misty had grown older, her once playful energy now replaced with a calm and serene demeanor. She still followed Daniel around the house, her favorite spot being curled up in his lap as he worked or read. Daniel cherished these moments, knowing that every day with her was a gift. One rainy afternoon, as Daniel sat by the window with Misty purring softly in his lap, he began to write another chapter of their story. This time, it was a letter to Misty, a way to put into words everything he had felt over the years but had never been able to say. "Dear Misty," he wrote, his pen moving slowly across the page. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to fully express what you mean to me, but I want to try. You came into my life at a time when I needed you more than I realized. And even when I let you down, you never gave up on me. Your forgiveness and trust saved me, Misty. You taught me what it means to love unconditionally and to never stop trying to be better." Daniel paused, his hand trembling slightly as he thought about the day he had left her in the woods. The memory still haunted him, but it also served as a constant reminder of how far they had come. "I made a terrible mistake," he continued, "but you gave me a second chance, and for that, I will always be grateful. You've been my companion, my teacher, and my inspiration. Every step I've taken since that day has been because of you." He looked down at Misty, who had shifted slightly in his lap, her eyes half closed in contentment. "You're my hero," he whispered, stroking her soft fur. The letter became one of many that Daniel wrote to Misty over the years. It was his way of preserving their story, of ensuring that their journey would never be forgotten. He kept the letters in a small box, alongside the mementos he had collected, photos of Misty, the toy mouse he had used to coax her out of the forest, and even the article that had first brought their story to the public's attention. Daniel often thought about how much Misty had changed his life. She had taught him the value of kindness, the importance of forgiveness, and the strength it took to rebuild after making a mistake. These lessons had become the foundation of everything he did, from his work at the animal shelter to the Second Chances campaign that had grown into a national movement. As Misty's health began to decline with age, Daniel devoted himself even more fully to her care. He adjusted his schedule to spend as much time with her as possible, ensuring that she was comfortable and surrounded by love. Every morning, he prepared her favorite meals, and every evening, he sat with her by the fire, reading aloud or simply enjoying the quiet companionship they had shared for so many years. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel woke to find Misty curled up in her usual spot at the foot of his bed. Her breathing was shallow, and her eyes opened only briefly when he called her name. Daniel's heart ached as he realized that her time was drawing near. He spent the entire day with her, holding her close and whispering words of love and gratitude. "You've given me everything, Misty," he said softly, tears streaming down his face. "I hope I've been able to give you even half as much." That evening, as the sun set and the world outside grew quiet, Misty took her final breath in Daniel's arms. She passed peacefully, surrounded by the love that had defined her life. The days that followed were filled with a profound sense of loss, but also a deep gratitude for the time they had shared. Daniel buried Misty in the garden, beneath the old oak tree where she had loved to sit and watch the birds. He marked the spot with a simple stone that read, "Misty, my heart, my hope, my forever." Though Misty was gone, her legacy lived on. Daniel continued his work with the Second Chances campaign, pouring his heart into helping animals and people in need. Every event, every speech, and every rescue was a tribute to the little cat who had changed his life. 1 year after Misty's passing, Daniel organized a special event at the animal shelter to honor her memory. The event, called Misty's Day, celebrated the bonds between humans and animals and raised funds for the shelter's programs. People from all over the community came to share their own stories of second chances and to pay tribute to Misty. During the event, Daniel unveiled a new mural at the shelter, a vibrant painting of Misty sitting beneath the oak tree, her golden eyes shining with the quiet wisdom that had always defined her. The mural was accompanied by a plaque that read, "In memory of Misty, a symbol of love, resilience, and the power of second chances." The crowd applauded, many wiping away tears as they looked at the mural. Daniel stepped forward to address the crowd, his voice steady despite the emotion in his heart. "Misty taught me that no mistake is too big to overcome, and no bond is too small to matter," he said. "Her story is proof that love and forgiveness can change the world, one life at a time." As the years went on, Misty's story continued to inspire. Daniel wrote a second book, Lessons from Misty, which became a bestseller and was translated into multiple languages. The book delved deeper into the lessons he had learned from his time with Misty, offering insights and inspiration to readers around the world. The Second Chances campaign expanded internationally, with chapters in dozens of countries. Daniel traveled far and wide, sharing Misty's story and advocating for animal welfare. He met countless people who credited Misty with inspiring them to make positive changes in their own lives. One woman approached him after a speech in a small town, tears streaming down her face. "Your story saved my dog," she said. "I was struggling to care for her, and I almost gave up. But then I read about Misty, and I realized I couldn't let her down. Thank you for showing me that there's always hope." Daniel hugged her tightly, his heart full of gratitude. "That's Misty's legacy," he said. "She's still changing lives." In the quiet moments of his life, Daniel often found himself sitting beneath the oak tree where Misty was buried. He would bring a cup of tea and a notebook, writing letters to her and reflecting on the journey they had shared. "Misty," he wrote one evening, "you may be gone, but you're still with me in everything I do. You taught me to love, to forgive, and to never stop trying. I'll carry those lessons with me forever." As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Daniel looked up, a peaceful smile on his face. He felt Misty's presence in the gentle rustle of the leaves, the soft glow of the moon, and the warmth that filled his heart. "Thank you, Misty," he whispered, "for everything." And as the world around him grew quiet, Daniel knew that their story would never truly end. It would live on in the hearts of everyone it had touched, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond between a man and his cat. After Misty's passing, Daniel's life took on a new rhythm. The sadness of losing her was a constant undercurrent, but he found solace in the work they had inspired together. Every time he helped an animal find a loving home or comforted someone struggling with the weight of responsibility, he felt Misty's presence guiding him. The oak tree in his backyard became a sacred place for him. Under its sprawling branches, he found peace and clarity. He spent many evenings there, journaling his thoughts and memories, often writing letters to Misty as though she could still read them. One evening, as he sat beneath the oak tree, a soft breeze ruffled the pages of his notebook. He paused, looking up at the stars twinkling through the leaves. "I hope I'm making you proud, Misty," he whispered. "Everything I do now is for you." Over time, Daniel's dedication to animal welfare led to incredible opportunities. He was invited to speak at international conferences, collaborate with major animal rights organizations, and even consult on legislation aimed at improving animal protection laws. Despite his growing influence, Daniel remained humble, always attributing his success to Misty. In one particularly moving speech at a global summit, Daniel shared the story of the day he had abandoned Misty in the woods. The audience listened in silence as he recounted the guilt, the regret, and the miraculous reunion that had changed his life. "I learned that we all make mistakes," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "What matters is how we choose to move forward. Misty taught me that forgiveness is possible, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that second chances are worth fighting for." The applause that followed was thunderous, and Daniel felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Misty's story was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who believed in the power of compassion and resilience. One day, Daniel received a letter from a young girl named Emily. She had read lessons from Misty with her mother and had been deeply moved by the story. "I have a cat named Luna," Emily wrote in careful, looping handwriting. "She was a stray, and she was scared of people at first. But now she sleeps on my bed every night, and she's my best friend. Thank you for showing me that animals need love just like we do." Daniel smiled as he read the letter, his heart warmed by Emily's words. He wrote back to her, thanking her for sharing her story and encouraging her to continue caring for Luna. "You and Luna are proof that love can transform lives," he wrote. "Never forget how special that bond is." As the years went by, Daniel began to slow down, focusing more on writing and mentoring young advocates in the animal welfare field. He opened his home to a few more rescue animals, a dog named Buddy, a parrot named Rosie, and a senior cat named Willow. Each one brought its own unique energy and joy into his life, but none could ever replace Misty. On the anniversary of Misty's passing, Daniel organized a small gathering at the animal shelter. Friends, colleagues, and community members came together to celebrate Misty's legacy. They shared stories of the animals they had adopted, the challenges they had overcome, and the lessons they had learned. Toward the end of the evening, Daniel stood beneath the mural of Misty and addressed the crowd. "Misty may no longer be with us, but her spirit lives on in every life we touch," he said. "She reminded me, and all of us, that love and forgiveness are the most powerful forces in the world. Let's honor her by continuing to spread that message." The crowd erupted into applause, and Daniel felt a swell of pride and gratitude. Misty's legacy had grown far beyond anything he could have imagined. In his later years, Daniel decided to write one final book, a memoir titled Misty's Tree, a journey of love and redemption. The book chronicled his life with Misty, from the day he had brought her home as a kitten to the profound lessons she had taught him after their reunion. The memoir was deeply personal, filled with anecdotes, reflections, and heartfelt letters to Misty. Daniel poured his soul into every page, hoping to capture the essence of their bond and the impact it had on his life. When the book was published, it became an instant bestseller, touching the hearts of readers around the world.